on this panel, we have all our litigants whose cases we have taken except Kiran. And I'm sure Kiran is going to be the next petitioner. So, yeah. So on this issue of reservation, I think it's a very, we included this in the conference because it is an issue that is now being litigated across many high courts. We started this initial battle in the Madras High Court with Deepika and Grace, and those issues haven't been sorted yet. Those cases are still pending. And now in the Karnataka High Court, the Karnataka High Court is actually examining the issue of reservation for transgender persons, and it's still pending. So I think this is really an apt time to discuss some of the constitutional issues around reservations for transgender persons. Before we start the conversation on reservations, what have been some of the debates around reservations for transgender persons? The initial debates were about looking at and including trans persons within the backward class. Next, please. And, this happened even prior to NALSA. So, there were, from the early 2010 onwards, there was an India exclusion report of 2013-14 where the status of transgender persons and the discrimination they faced was, written about, and that recommended that they should be included within the backward class. This exercise was done in Karnataka, where several activists and groups worked with the Karnataka Backward Classes Commission. And the Karnataka Backward Classes Commission, in fact, stated that yes, transgender persons can be included within backward classes. And this was also done this same recommendation was also given by the National Commission for Backward Classes, saying that yes, state backward classes commissions should look at including transgender persons within backward classes. So I want to pause here because, at that time, I think issues of trans rights weren't that articulated yet. They were not articulated in such a nuanced way as they are now. So, so I think these recommendations were just made based on whatever is seen to be possible. So, the recommendations were made that you should include them within backward classes, and that kind of framed the debate, which, and we'll see the repercussions of that. Yeah, next, please. This happened in the, from 2000 to 2010 to 2014. And then came the NALSA judgment. And NALSA was the main judgment which spoke about transgender rights, and the judgment held a few important observations. Next, please. Yeah, so importantly, what the Supreme Court held in NALSA is that it held that sex under Article 15 as a ground for non-discrimination should include or does include gender and gender identity. So Article 15 is a fundamental right which says no person shall be discriminated on the grounds of sex, race, caste, place of birth, or religion. And the Supreme Court elaborated sex to mean gender and elaborated it to also mean gender identity, which means that nobody could be discriminated on the basis of gender identity. And also held that, so gender identity was included in the definition of sex as a ground for discrimination. And what it also held, while holding that persons have the right to self-determine their gender identity and that they should not be discriminated on the basis of their gender identity, it held that center and state governments should take steps to treat transgender persons as socially and educationally backward classes of citizens and extend all kinds of reservations to them in cases of admission in educational institutions and for public appointments. So, the arguments made in the Supreme Court on equality and equal opportunity were again on the basis of including them as backward classes, because that was the basis of, those were the debates that were already made. And so this was presented to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kind of just makes broad statement that yes, they are backward classes, they are socially and educationally backward, and therefore they should be given reservations as backward classes. Yeah. Now, and so, Nalsa happened. There was a vague kind of observation in Nalsa that reservations should be given. So what happens after Nalsa, after 2014? Yeah. So immediately around the time that Nalsa was passed, the Nalsa judgment was given, we had the 2014 bill, which was the Tiruchi Shiva bill. And the Tiruchi Shiva bill was the first draft bill, and this provided that there would be 2% of seats reserved for transgender persons, both in education and in appointments. The Tiruchi Shiva bill didn't say on what basis. It was a statutory provision, like the way we have, for example, an analogy, we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. It's a statute. And the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act provides for reservations for persons with disabilities, both in higher education and in public employment. It gives 4% reservations in public employment and 5% reservations in higher education. So like that, the 2014 bill provided for 2% reservation. Again, that bill, of course, was not passed. But the only state which took forward the Nalsa kind of direction was the state of Tamil Nadu. And what Tamil Nadu did is that Tamil Nadu government passed a notification including transgender persons within the OBC category. OBC is other backward class. In Tamil Nadu, it is known as most backward classes. But it's the same. It basically included them within backward classes. But no percentage was given. So, they are included within backward classes. Next, please. I just want to pause here. So while, this notification came in a little later, but simultaneously, we saw that Tamil Nadu had a lot of cases for reservation for transgender persons. It was one of the most active high courts. And interestingly, they were all cases where transgender persons were applying for police constable posts. And reservation wasn't provided, but they were applying under the woman category. So there was no reservation in place because the MBC notification hadn't come yet into force. They were applying under the women category. They were not being given the seats even under the woman category because there were seats posts reserved for women. And there were posts reserved for women. They were not being given the woman category. And interestingly, the issue that came up again and again was that, are you a woman? And are you misusing the category to get reservation? And I want to flag this because when we talk about constitutional reservation, the issue of misuse and fraud, because this is seen as a very, very precious benefit, comes up again and again. So I've highlighted some of these cases, but one of the cases was, in addition to Nangai and Pritika case, where both of them were given reservation, given the post by the Madras High Court. Another case was Naga Lakshmi versus Director General of Police. Here, this was a case where a trans woman who was also scheduled caste, she applied for the post and she applied under the woman category because there were no trans persons categories. She got the post, she got the reservation for the post reserved for women. And after she got the job and she started working, she went through a very routine medical test. And in the medical test, it was pointed out that she is transgender. And then her appointment was cancelled on the ground that she's not a woman and that she's transgender, though she identified as a woman. And the Madras High Court, and then she challenged it in the Madras High Court. And it was alleged by the government that she fraudulently put herself out as a woman to get the reservation. And the Madras High Court said that this cannot be accepted because in NALSA you have the right to your gender identity as male, female, or transgender. And the Madras High Court said that, declared that she's a woman and that she is entitled to the reservation category. But I will come back to this issue again, but I wanted to flag it. How the issue of reservation is very tied to the issue of misuse. Next, please. And then we have the 2019 Act, Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. This does not provide any reservations. While it allows you to get a transgender certificate, it does not adhere to the principle of self-identification or self-determination of gender, either as male, female, or transgender. What it allows is that it allows you to get a certificate as a transgender person without medical test. But if you want to get a male or female identity, as we discussed in the panel yesterday, you have to then get medical reassignment and get medical certificate. So it does not follow the principle of self-determination for female or male gender determination. Next, please. So in this context, how should we argue for reservations for transgender persons under the constitutional framework? We've heard Deepika and we've heard Kiran Nayak. And particularly the issue, two issues. One is Deepika raised the issue that she kept having, she didn't score enough marks. She had age. She wasn't able to make the age cutoffs. And Kiran raised the issue that when he is having a certain caste identity as Adivasi and disability, how does the OBC category satisfy equal opportunity? So I'll just go into that and kind of end it by here. So in our constitutional framework, reservations are there under Article 15 and 16 of the Constitution for those who are either lawyers or who've examined it. And reservations are really of two types. They are vertical reservations and horizontal reservations. This does become a little technical, but I think it's important that we try and understand it. So vertical reservations are under Article 15.4 and 16.4 because they are on the basis of caste, tribe, and backward classes. And they're called vertical because they operate vertically. So GM is general merit, SC is the scheduled caste, ST is scheduled tribe, and OBC. And then you have horizontal reservations, which are actually horizontal and cut across vertical reservations. So horizontal reservations are for women, and this is across, not just for jobs, but for all forms of reservation in education as well. Reservations for women are made under Article 15.3. Article 15 is a non-discrimination fundamental right, and 15.3 says that the state can make special provisions for women and children. And some of the special provisions it makes are reservations for women. And persons with disability also operates horizontally. Now in India, we have persons with disability reservations both under a law, a separate law, and also under Article 16.1. So Article 16 is a large article that deals with equal opportunities in public employment. And 16.1 is a general fundamental right that all persons shall have equal opportunity in public employment. And then 16.2, 3, and 4 talks about scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, OBCs, etc. So these are how horizontal and vertical reservations are formed. Now, in NALSA, the Supreme Court held that transgender persons should be included as OBCs under backward classes. So then they would fall under the OBC vertical because that's where they're included. So when we include transgender persons within backward class, what are some of the challenges? And some of the challenges I would argue are, one is that, what do we mean by backward class? Now, of course, there is a whole, jurisprudence of Supreme Court decisions on what is backward class. It's, anybody who studied reservations, case law will know that it's extremely, not just complicated, but confusing. But the Supreme Court has looked at what socially and educationally backward classes are. It, in many judgments, says that caste is a criteria perhaps, but when you look at empirical data of socially or educationally backwardness, what it assumes is that backward class is some kind of homogeneous group. If you look at so many other categories of backward class, they're basically, caste categories, which are not scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. So, for example, in Karnataka, you say Lingayat, Vakaligas, right? They are backward classes. I mean, they come under OBC, but they have some homogeneity. So, we ask ourselves, does the transgender identity to be included as backward class, is it a homogeneous or a uniform identity? There is so much diversity even within the trans identity, right? Then what about gender? Backward class, if you talk about backward class, it doesn't talk about gender at all. But the trans identity is based on an understanding of gender, that it is a form of gender identity under the Constitution. Second, what about multiple identities? What Kiran said. What if you have a disability? What if you have a SC scheduled caste or scheduled tribes? So then, by including transgender within an OBC vertical category, what happens to the other identities that a person may have? And that issue is not, and that frames many of these challenges. So what, in fact, some of the debates we've been having with Grace and with many other persons from the trans community legally, is that it is up to us to frame how we want the court to frame reservations. I mean, this is an issue that we are trying to raise in Tamil Nadu and in the Karnataka High Court, that though the Supreme Court has said that you include them as backward classes, we have to, in fact, ask the courts to take a different constitutional position, and the position that can actually incorporate the different trans identities and not take away their caste identity, their disability identity, and their gender identity, is only if you have a horizontal reservation. So the way gender is a form for reserving posts for women, and the way disability is a way for reserving posts for persons with disabilities, transgender persons, if made as a horizontal category, then what it allows for is that it allows for transgender SC persons to get reservation. It allows for transgender ST persons, and there are also transgender persons who are anyway from an OBC category. By including them within OBC, you're not doing them providing any additional benefit. They should be entitled to get that additional benefit if they are anyway from an OBC category. So, I mean, that's called a compartmentalized reservation. And so that is what we are arguing, that the only way that reservation would be beneficial is if it's horizontal. Yeah. And so to conclude, I would kind of say that if we're looking at reservations for trans persons, is it not appropriate that it is a reservation category that is based on gender? Because gender-based discrimination is what NALSA held in a way that, and NALSA and NAFTAGE, that transgender persons are discriminated on the basis of their gender identity, and therefore gender should be the criteria for constitutional reservations. It should be horizontal and compartmentalized reservations for education and public employment, because that will take into account the intersectional identities. And this would mean that Dalit and OBC transgender persons would not be required to give up their caste identity and would in fact be able to use or to assert their SC, ST and OBC status that they have for reservations. And also to ensure that reservations should not be on the basis of medical diagnosis, but should be on the basis of gender self-determination, which is what NALSA held, but that's not, unfortunately, what the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act says. And finally, there needs to be a way to fix a percentage. Now, the other challenge with the OBC inclusion is that it's all very well to say that, yes, you're included as backward class. But, we have at least 30, 40 different communities within the backward class communities, for example, in every state. There's no reservation of a particular the whole debate of subgroup reservation is another kind of debate altogether. So even by including transgender persons within the OBC category, how are you ensuring that they're going to get even a single job, single post? Because they will then have to compete, like what Deepika said. She's been competing for the last 3 years. She's been unable to get the cutoff marks or the different, to clear the physical tests. And so unless there is a, percentage of posts, number of posts reserved, we're not going to be able to see any results. So I end with that. Thank you.